Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 21 of season 1 of Babylon 5, The Quality of Mercy. I'll be in touch. Touch this. Why point there? We'll find out. Malari is being encouraged to make friends and influence people by a senator. He bumps into Lennier on the way out of his quarters and asks when Delenn will be back from Minbar, to which the response is, in a few days. Londo realises he knows virtually nothing about Lennier, and Lennier doesn't have much to tell beyond living in a temple and being religious caste. Londo decides to educate him in the real world for the next 2 days. Now is he Drake from Aliens? And John Lee from Starfleet. Mark Rolston as Carl Mueller. He's guilty of murder, whoever he's playing, and his sentence is due tomorrow to be handed down by the Ombudsman. Ivanova goes to a clinic in Down Below. Franklin is manning it, and without looking up asks Ivanova to remove her clothes, to which she replies she'd like dinner first. He's running this on the quiet as a healer, because not everyone can afford MedLab, and whilst it feels like Ivanova is coming down hard on him, it's only because she wanted to be in the loop. She herself has been known to bend the rules on occasion. So she mucks in, as Franklin is wondering why his normal queue of patients is half the size he anticipated. Garibaldi is keen to shove Mueller out of an airlock. He can't prove it, but he's convinced he's killed more than just 2 lurkers and a security officer in his time from the way the killings were carried out. 3 options for him: prison back home, the station brig for life, but where there's no space for him, or a telepath. Talia isn't keen on being involved, but very few telepaths are trained for criminal cases, and she is one. She recalls her experience on Mars that we saw in Deathwalker, but no replacement is available. She can't go on a fishing trip either. He hasn't been charged with anything else, so anything else that she finds in his mind isn't admissible. In Down Below, Brown 27G, Franklin is looking for a quack, Laura Rosen, a woman who is not a licensed doctor, offering something akin to a sideshow medicine woman treatment. She's just taking contributions. Franklin's assuming it's all a con, but she's adamant that while she doesn't fully understand the alien tech she's using, it's getting the job done. The woman he asks directions from comes in. It's her daughter, who is less than impressed with his attitude. Franklin leaves, but says he'll be back. In court, sentence is passed. We now find out that beyond the scan, Mueller is going to be mind-wiped by a machine, not Talia, so that the murderous personality no longer exists. Not a physical death, but a mental death. Franklin isn't impressed by the option, but Garibaldi has no such qualms. In exchange for setting things up, Franklin asks Garibaldi to look into Laura for him. Lennier's education has begun. In a bar, with an exotic dancer. And wouldn't you just know it, Londo has left his credit chip in his quarters. Poor old Lennier. We also discover that Minbari and alcohol do not mix. Well, they do, except that it turns them into homicidal nutters. Not ideal. So Londo hastily confiscates the drink he just told Lennier was teetotal and orders him a water instead. Franklin catches up with Laura's daughter again, having apparently been briefed by Garibaldi. Her mother is a doctor, after all. She lost herself in the job and started taking stims to try and work longer hours to help more people. She became addicted to them, wouldn't listen when told that, and made a mistake. And her life was lost and her license revoked. She has found a way to be a healer again and tried to reclaim her role in society. Franklin knows they have enough money to go back to Earth, thanks to Garibaldi's research, but she thinks it's better for her mother not to travel and just keep doing good while she still can. The bar Londo and Lennier are in is the Dark Star, as in the film. While Londo asks one of the waitresses to kill him as Lennier is recounting his academic endeavours in the temple, he happens to mention that he studied probability, having moved on from linguistics. Suddenly, Londo is paying attention again, and whilst Lennier would quite like to see another dance, Londo wants to introduce him to an Earth game called Poker. Talia begins her scan, having put a black band over her Psychor badge. Unfortunately, Garibaldi was right. Mueller has been recruiting voices for his choir, and it is a large choir. Talia is clearly disturbed. She breaks out of it as he touches her cheek, but is physically shaken as the guards escort her out. Muller asks her to stay for the symphony, saying he'll save a place for her. Franklin discovers that Laura's patients are not getting worse, quite the opposite, and leaves his clinic to see her. Lennier is proving a little too proficient at poker. He basically tells everyone he's got a winning hand as soon as he gets it, to Londo's annoyance. Franklin monitors a healing session and discovers that Laura's life signs drop during the session, and correctly guesses that the machine is transferring energy from her to the patient. She explains that the alien trader she got it from didn't know what it was for, but it's a means of corporal punishment. Life force can be taken from a criminal to restore another. She's managed to find a less severe setting, but it is still a strain. Even more so for her because she has Lake syndrome, which Franklin of course knows means she's in constant pain. She doesn't have long left to live because of it, and she wants to keep making a difference while she can, and says she's going to figure out how the machine does it without the assistance he offers. She's kept the truth from her daughter Janice because she knew she'd try and stop her because of the side effects. So they make a deal. On the way out, he invites her daughter to dinner, the old smoothie. Talia is recovering in the garden. So the scan was a comparison to check him post-mind wipe. She tells Garibaldi that she's scanned alien minds with more humanity than Muller's, and that we all hide monsters. Garibaldi would have won his bet that he'd killed before too. At the poker table, Londo is improving his hand by employing some sort of tentacle. Muller is being transported to his wipe, but manages to get the drop on Garibaldi and get into a travel tube, but not before Garibaldi wings him with his PPG. Unfortunately, Muller takes a PPG from the guard who happened to be in the lift and manages to get out on another level as Garibaldi has the tube stopped. Back at the poker table, Londo's ruse has been rumbled, as his appendage gets an icy surprise when a jug of iced water is put on top of it. As a warthog-looking player objects quite violently to Londo's cheating ways, Lennier suddenly goes Jackie Chan on him. It would appear he also took martial arts in the temple. Unfortunately, the odds rapidly deteriorate, and not in their favour. Lou Welch, the officer from the lift, is being treated by Franklin, who realises that the wounded Muller is likely to pay Laura a visit to get his wound checked. And he notes that the wound itself would have been cauterised, but it will have by the heat of the PPG blast, but it will have caused internal damage. He takes off to see her, asking Welch to get Mr. Garibaldi to send a team if he doesn't hear from him in 20 minutes. It turns out that was too long a time, because Muller is already being healed with Laura operating the machine and Janice a hostage. Laura is exhausted, but Muller tells her to finish and fires a warning shot when Franklin tries to make a move. Laura realises Janice is in real danger and switches the machine from push to pull, draining Muller's life force as he is ravaged by the pain of her Lake syndrome. The PPG falls from his grasp and he dies moments later. Laura is acquitted in the B5 court on the basis of self-defence. The machine confiscated, but although she is now fully healed and has Garibaldi's thanks, she has taken her life and so gone against her oath. So she is not alright, in response to Franklin's question. She says she did the necessary thing when Janice tries to reassure her, and that is not always the right thing. Ivanova tells Garibaldi that the incident at the Dark Star has been resolved, 30 humans and aliens involved, and 2 of the aliens weren't talking. When she tells him who they were, he's gobsmacked. The battered perpetrators are being remonstrated with by Sinclair in Londo's quarters. To Londo and Sinclair's surprise, Lennier effectively takes the fall for Londo's cheating ways. He half lies, saying that he asked Londo to show him areas he was unfamiliar with, which led to a misunderstanding that caused the incident. Happily, they both have diplomatic immunity. Londo asks why Lennier covered for him, and he explains that Minbari culture allows them to lie to protect another's honour. Delenn will not ask about the incident out of respect either, so it's all fine. Londo says he owes Lennier, and Lennier asks him what part of him he was using to cheat. Londo whispers in his ear and proceeds to hold up the prominent statue of the Centauri love god, which is a blend of male and female Centauri genitalia. Those tentacles are not for decorative purposes, it turns out. Remember his gesture to the senator at the start? Yup, Not everyone keeps their genitalia in the same place. Lennier decides to take a vow of silence on the matter, very wisely. And Franklin gets his date after all, after Laura hands over the machine to him and heads out to find another means of redemption, leaving her daughter behind. I must admit I had forgotten it was Mark Rolston guest starring in this one. He of course had an established science fiction pedigree from Aliens and other roles. I also have to smile because this was before my Starfleet website came into being circa 1998, but he voiced the large hero character John Lee in that too, so he's appeared in quite a few productions I have an affinity for. He's genuinely fearsome in this, I think, which was in contrast to the more heroic roles I'd previously seen him in. The actress playing Laura was reminding me of someone, but I couldn't place her, so I looked her up, and it was June Lockhart, who played the mother in Lost in Space in the 60s. I was getting a Murder, She Wrote vibe, but I knew it wasn't her. Somewhat ironically, Bill Mumy, who plays Lennier, was her son in Lost in Space, and yet they're never on screen together in this entire episode. I was going to say this was a 2-stream episode, but really it's 3 streams, 2 of which meet at the end. Written by JMS, so what I would term an arc episode. I actually asked JMS about this on Twitter recently, because I was interested to understand how what I term non-arc episodes still maintain their integrity and references to episodes past when they weren't written by him. He explained that he would give each episode a once-over as showrunner, even when he wasn't writing it, and so would drop in detail as needed to ensure consistency and arc references where appropriate. Clearly having the arc and him having such a clarity of vision about the show as a whole was what bound the whole thing together, and he wasn't about to leave it just to a show bible to reinforce that vision. So, Londo and Lennier, not a pairing that you would imagine happening, and yet of course comedy gold from our point of view, as Londo takes advantage of Lennier's credit chip and his naivete, and starts to open the poor innocent lad's eyes to the seedier side of Babylon 5. We also see Londo's innovative card sharking methodology, which turns out to be rather more intimate than one might have imagined. Centauri biology aside, we also learn that Minbari biology is very sensitive to alcohol, and they are not happy drunks. Also, whilst Lennier might be religious caste by training, it would seem he also got some warrior monk training, because he suddenly springs into high-kicking combat action to help Londo. Certainly not a side of his character we've seen before, and his protection of Londo offers an interesting insight into Minbari psychology. A learning experience as Londo promised, although a little more uncomfortable than reading. A disgraced yet fundamentally well-meaning doctor taking her life painfully in self-defence and healing herself into the bargain certainly throws up a lot of interesting moral conflicts, particularly as we know the death penalty shouldn't have been applicable in this individual's case. In fairness, Laura's character is clearly going to have a degree of difficulty in reconciling the issues, but of course we know from Talia's scan that Garibaldi is going to be more than happy with the outcome. It's also apparent why telepaths who do these comparator scans burn out quite so quickly. They would see an awful lot of darkness in these types of minds. It's interesting that the court can effectively order a personality erased and a new one created to benefit the harmed community. Doesn't that effectively involve a death of a person as much as the death of a body would? But is it more humane than a life behind bars? It's a novel concept to be sure. As ever with Babylon 5, you can take it at face value, or you can dive deeper, and good writing is, I think, all about the ability to find layers of meaning if you choose to do so. Franklin's role in this episode is clearly intended to contrast with Laura's fall from grace, but both are fundamentally of the same healing inclination. He was rather quick to dismiss Laura's potential to be a genuine healer. The fact that she was only asking for contributions should have been an indicator that he wasn't on the right track. He was also surprisingly invasive of their privacy by getting information on how much money they had available. It's rather like his attitude in Believers. He's very quick to assume the moral high ground, but we've seen him take wrong steps before now, either by trusting others too much or just being convinced of his own righteousness. It's not that he doesn't mean well, it's just that he has a tendency to snap into a particular way of thinking very rapidly and sticks with it right up until the point that everything is screaming at him that he's got it wrong. Not very self-reflective. Still gets the girl, mind you. Annoying. So, quite a multi-layered, multifaceted episode, this one. Much less for Yvonne and Sinclair to do, no Jakar, no Delenn, but a return from the Ombudsman. Overall, quite a satisfying episode, even if it does have a feeling of filler about it somehow. Join me next week for the final episode of Season 1 of Babylon 5.